My stepmother burned everything that reminded me of my mother, and my father just stood by and watched. She thought she could erase the past as easily as wiping a tape on an old recorder, but she forgot one small detail. I wasn't going to let it slide. What I did in return shattered her life into pieces. Let's start with the most interesting part. My name is Max. I'm 26 years old, and everything was going fine until my dad decided to marry this Wonder Woman, Linda. At first, it seemed like your typical family comedy. A new wife with wide smiles and kind looks. And you know what? I naively thought maybe it would all work out. Sure, I wasn't thrilled about someone replacing my mother, but who was I to interfere? I figured if I just stayed out of the way, everything would be fine. But like in horror movies, when the hero says, "Hey, everything's calm," bam! The monster jumps out from around the corner. That's how Linda started to show her true colors. First, she simply removed small things connected to my mom. Photos disappeared from the shelves. Old items suddenly became unnecessary. It looked suspicious, but Dad was too blinded by love. He sat there, like some zombie in his pink dream, not even noticing how his new darling was wiping her feet on my mother's memory. Classic. I tried to ignore it. Seriously, who wants to stir up drama over memories? But they were my memories, and then Linda really went overboard. She started getting jealous. Not of someone alive, but of the memory of my mom. Can you even imagine how insecure you must be to compete with someone who isn't even alive? Well, everyone has their own way of losing it, but this woman seemed determined to break every toxicity record out there. One day, I came home from work, walked into the living room, and found it completely empty. Well, that's just weird, I thought. I went further, and you know what I found? All of my mom's things. Photos, jewelry, even her favorite old vase were gone. Just vanished, as if they never existed. And there was Linda, grinning like she could audition for the Joker, saying, "I decided it was time to let go of the past." Seriously? You decided to let go of the past? I was speechless for a second. I stood there staring at her, trying to process how anyone could say something like that. What the hell did you do with my mom's things? And then, with disgusting satisfaction, she nodded. I burned them. Burned them. Like they were garbage. My mom's things were like an anchor for me in this storm called life. They were all I had left of her after she died, and honestly, I treasured them. Photos, jewelry, letters, all those little things were the only connection to the past that I wasn't ready to let go of. But one evening after work, I came home, and I felt that something was off. You know that feeling when everything seems in place, but there's a strange silence, like the house is hiding something? I walk into my room and, bam! It's empty. Completely. No photos, no jewelry. Even the letters were gone. It used to feel like a memory museum, but now it was a blank white page. My stomach flipped, and I ran around the house like a madman searching for any trace. But of course, I didn't find anything. And then Linda appears around the corner, smiling like she just won the lottery and says, "I decided it was time to let go of the past." Wait, what? That was the moment I snapped. I felt like a cold wave crashed into me. Are you even listening to what you're saying? You burned all of it? I spat out, unable to believe my own ears. She nodded, calmly, without a shred of guilt, with that disgusting expression on her face, as if she had done something noble, rather than destroying the last pieces of my connection to my mom. At that moment, I completely lost it. All the anger I'd bottled up for months, maybe even years, just exploded. I lunged at Linda like some wild animal, fists clenched, heart pounding, and honestly, if my dad hadn't walked in at that exact second, I'm not sure what would have happened. Ever see someone literally boil over with rage? Yeah, that was me. On the verge of tearing everything apart. The air was thick with tension. My vision blurred from adrenaline, and I could feel every muscle in my body tighten, as if I was ready to snap. Dad burst in just as I was about to reach her, and in a split second, he pulled us apart. It was chaotic. Him desperately trying to be the peacemaker, while I was already too far gone, screaming like a madman. "You destroyed everything! My mom's things, her memory, everything I had left of her!" My voice cracked, but I didn't care. It felt like I was fighting for my life, or at least for what was left of it. And Linda? This woman didn't even blink. She just stood there, unfazed, with that same smug look, like I was yelling at her for something trivial. Have you ever seen someone who acts like they're too good to even react? That was her. She looked at me as if I was throwing a tantrum over a broken toy. And instead of apologizing or showing even the tiniest bit of regret, she calmly said, "It was for the best." What? The hell? For the best? As if burning every single piece of my dead mom's memory was her idea of helping us heal, or some twisted kind of therapy. I stood there, seething, waiting for Dad to jump in, waiting for him to finally get it, to realize that Linda had crossed every possible line. I mean, this was Mom we were talking about, his wife, my mother, the woman who held our family together. But Dad, nothing. Absolute zero. He stood there, looking dumbfounded, like he didn't even know what to say. His eyes darted back and forth between us, but he didn't move, didn't say a word. I could see it in his face. He was lost, completely under her spell. It hit me like a ton of bricks. The Dad I used to know, gone. He wasn't going to defend me. He wasn't going to remember what my mom meant to him. In that moment, I realized the truth. He had already chosen Linda, and in choosing her, he let go of everything that mattered. My mom, her memory, none of it mattered to him anymore. That night I stormed out of the house, but inside, I was on fire. Like not just angry, I was boiling. There was no way I was just going to walk away and let it all go. Linda had taken everything that connected me to my mom and torched it. Literally. Did she really think she could just erase all that and keep living her perfect little life? Not on my watch. If she thought she could erase the past, I was about to detonate her present. And trust me, I wasn't playing around. I was dead serious. I knew I had to take my time, though. I couldn't just go in guns blazing. No, I needed to be smart about this. So, I started digging. Real deep. Ever watch those detective movies where the guy just doesn't stop until he finds the truth? Yeah, that was me. I went full-on Sherlock, minus the British accent and the deerstalker hat. Over the next few days, I gathered every scrap of information I could find on Linda. I was combing through receipts, emails, even overheard some of her phone calls. The deeper I dug, the more dirt I uncovered. You know that saying, the deeper into the woods, the thicker the trees? Well, this wasn't just a forest. It was a jungle of secrets. Turns out Linda didn't just have skeletons in her closet. She had an entire basement full of financial skeletons. And they were ugly. This woman wasn't just manipulating my dad emotionally, she was robbing him blind. She'd been borrowing his savings for years, using it to fuel her little high-maintenance lifestyle. But here's the kicker. She'd been covering it up with fake reports, IOUs, and all sorts of creative accounting tricks. She thought she was some kind of financial genius, but in reality, she was just digging herself deeper into a hole. And the debts? Oh man, Linda had more debts than my grandma has wrinkles, and that's saying something. You'd never know it by looking at her. Always in her fancy clothes, hair perfectly done, nails looking like they cost more than my entire rent. But behind that glossy facade, a whole mountain of unpaid bills and credit card debt. It was like one of those con artist movies where everything looks perfect until it all comes crashing down. And trust me, it was about to crash. That's when it clicked. I had all the ammunition I needed to take her down, and take her down hard. She thought she was clever, thought she had my dad wrapped around her finger, but now I had the upper hand. All that dirt she'd been hiding? It was going to be her undoing. She had destroyed my past, but I was about to shred her present, so thoroughly that there would be no coming back. Game on, Linda. I didn't just prepare for a counterattack. I was crafting a full-blown master plan, like some kind of evil genius. Seriously, you think I was just sitting around, waiting for Linda to slip up again? Nah, I turned her whole life into one big chess game. And the best part? She didn't even know she was already in checkmate from the moment I started moving the pieces. Every single step she took, every little decision, I was there in the background, orchestrating it all like some twisted puppet master. The real thrill was knowing she had no idea. The trap I set was brilliant. It was the kind of thing you'd see in a movie where the hero, accidentally, stumbles upon some big clue. But in reality, it's all been set up perfectly. I made it so that Dad would find out about her massive pile of debt on his own. No need for me to point fingers. I let the numbers do the talking. Linda, thinking she was invincible, took Dad's credit cards to start chipping away at her mountain of debt. She figured she could keep getting away with it, like she had in the past, never suspecting that this time I was pulling the strings from behind the curtain. Then came the day when those credit card statements arrived. That's when the real fun started. Dad sitting there at the table, casually flipping through the mail, and I stroll up all innocent, like I'm just minding my own business. Inside, though, I'm practically buzzing with anticipation. Dad, what's up with these strange charges? Did you really buy all this? I ask, knowing full well what's about to go down. The second those words left my mouth, I could see it. The confusion, the doubt creeping onto his face as he starts flipping through the statements again. And then, boom! It hit him like a ton of bricks. Full-on realization smacked him in the face. His eyes widened, and he mumbled, "How could she do this?" Like a kid finding out his favorite superhero was just an actor in a suit. His voice? It was broken, like he had just been told Santa Claus doesn't exist, and his beloved dog ran away in the same sentence. He sat there, surrounded by a sea of bills, looking like he'd been flattened by a financial freight train. I just stood by, playing the role of the innocent bystander, while inside I was practically grinning. My dad's world, his trust in Linda, was starting to crumble, brick by brick, like one of those cheap houses built in a rush to meet a deadline. I watched as his seemingly solid wall of faith in her began to fall apart, like a clearance sale dress ripping at the seams. And man, I was ready for the big collapse. Just a little more pressure, and the whole thing, Linda's carefully constructed web of lies, would come crashing down, hard and loud. The best part? She didn't even know it was happening. When Dad finally started to piece together that his perfect wife wasn't the angel he thought she was, but more like a wolf in sheep's clothing, I knew it was time to drop the hammer. You know those movie scenes where everything slows down and the hero makes that final game-changing move? Yeah, that was my moment. We sat down at the kitchen table, me as calm as I could be, and Dad still in shock from all the dirty laundry I'd aired about Linda. I looked him straight in the eye and said, "Dad, brace yourself. This is gonna hurt." And then I dropped the bombshell. Linda was planning to sell our house. Yep, the house I grew up in, the one filled with all our family memories. Her brilliant plan B was to dump it, like an old, worn-out couch, just to cover her mountain of debts. She was ready to cash in and leave us in the dust, all for her selfish little escape plan. If things got too dicey, she'd sell our home and disappear with the money, riding off into the sunset like some con artist in a bad western. Dad just sat there listening, and I could see it all play out on his face. First confusion, then disbelief, and finally the fury. It was like watching a volcano slowly heat up before it blows its top. His eyes went wide, his fists clenched, and his face turned redder by the second. "What? She was going to sell our home?" he roared, his voice booming through the room like he'd just found out his favorite football team had been banned for life. He shot up from his chair, practically shaking with anger, and it was clear that if I didn't stop him, he was about to march upstairs and confront Linda head-on, no holds barred. I barely had time to grab his arm and say, "Hey, calm down. We can't just storm in there and start a fight. We need to play this smart. Let's not do anything stupid." It was like trying to hold back a tidal wave, but somehow I managed to pull him back from the brink. "We need to handle this legally," I insisted. "Let's call a lawyer. Get everything in writing. If we don't do this right, she's gonna find a way to slither out of it." And that was the key move. This wasn't just about some emotional blow-up. No, this was a chess game, and I was playing it by the book. Linda might have thought she was the queen on the board, controlling everything. But little did she know, I was about to put her in checkmate. We didn't give her the satisfaction of a big family blowout. No screaming matches, no dramatic confrontations. We went straight to the legal route, locked it all down, airtight, to make sure she had no escape. That was the moment everything began to unravel for her. I could almost hear the cracks forming in the perfect little world she'd built around herself. First, Dad realized she wasn't the woman he thought she was. Now, with the lawyer involved, Linda was losing all the cards she thought she had up her sleeve. Her world was crumbling like a house of cards caught in a storm, and every desperate move she made only brought her closer to the inevitable, complete and utter ruin. A week later, Linda's fantasy of being the perfect wife didn't just crash and burn. It went down in a full-blown disaster. You know, like one of those slow-motion train wrecks where you see every single piece of debris flying through the air? Yeah, it was exactly like that. She found out she was being charged with fraud and financial crimes. And man, you should have seen her face when the news hit. All that color drained out of her like someone unplugged the life from her veins. Her eyes started darting around like she was looking for an exit, like she could somehow wiggle her way out of this one. But there was no escape, and she knew it. Of course, being Linda, she tried to slither out of it. Like a snake on a hot skillet, she was scrambling, throwing out every excuse in the book. "This is all a misunderstanding, honey. I can explain," she stammered, her voice dripping with desperation. But guess what? No amount of her pitiful whining could undo what she had done. The evidence was stacked up against her like a brick wall, and it was as solid as steel. She couldn't charm or manipulate her way out of this one. The jig was up, and everyone knew it. And that's when Dad finally woke up from whatever trance he had been under. I'm not sure where his head had been all this time, maybe floating somewhere in denial or clouded by whatever spell Linda had cast. But now he was wide awake. He didn't just file for divorce. He did it with style, like someone signing a contract for a multi-million-dollar deal. There wasn't any hesitation. He cut her off from everything. First move? Blocked her access to all his bank accounts. Boom! Her credit cards? Done. Just useless pieces of plastic now. The house? Nope. She was out. And the money? Say goodbye to those high-end shopping sprees and luxury spas. Shopping therapy wasn't gonna save her this time. But the biggest thing she lost wasn't the money or the house. Oh no. The most important thing she lost was control. Control over Dad, control over me, and really, control over the entire family. The one thing that made her feel powerful was ripped away from her, and that's when the real show began. Watching Linda, the once so composed queen of manipulation, start to unravel was like watching an empire collapse in real time. Day by day, I saw her fall apart, little by little, as the walls of her fake castle crumbled around her. She used to strut around the house like she owned the place, like she was the ruler of her own little kingdom. Now, she was more like a defeated prisoner in her own life. Her confidence, the very thing she'd used to wrap Dad around her finger, was melting faster than ice cream on a scorching summer day. She didn't go down without a fight, of course. Linda wasn't one to just roll over and accept defeat. Oh no, she was clinging to whatever she could, pleading with Dad, insisting that they could still fix things. Like, really? Fix this? There was no fixing it, no coming back from where she'd taken everything. Her empire of lies was collapsing by the hour, and the more she tried to hold it together, the faster it crumbled in her hands. It was honestly kind of funny in a dark, twisted way, watching her once flawless facade fall apart right before my eyes. Her fake life, the one she'd so carefully built on lies and manipulation, was gone. All her power, her control, everything was slipping through her fingers, and there was nothing she could do about it. It was like watching a slow-motion disaster, but this time, I wasn't the one caught in the wreckage. She was. Linda didn't just give up. She fought to the bitter end. She thrashed around, desperately trying to keep hold of whatever scraps were left of her perfect life, like a fish out of water, gasping for air. But deep down, I think she knew it was over. Her career? Shattered beyond repair, like a house of cards caught in the middle of a hurricane. And her reputation? Please, what reputation? Everyone knew by now she was a fraud. That polished image of the great lady she'd spent so much time building up crumbled before everyone's eyes, like cheap paint peeling off a wall. Now, when people saw her in public, they whispered behind her back, pointing. "Oh, isn't that the woman who scammed her husband and tried to sell her own family's house?" Yeah, Linda, great reputation. The queen of the scam, nothing more. Dad, meanwhile, had finally taken off those rose-colored glasses he'd been wearing for years. It was like he had been sleepwalking through a nightmare, and now he was finally waking up. Slowly but surely, the fog lifted. He started to come back to the version of himself that I remembered from before Linda. You could almost see it in the way he carried himself, like he'd been freed from some kind of hypnosis. For so long, she'd had him wrapped around her finger, but now, that spell was broken. It was like seeing him snap back into reality after years of being her puppet. And let me tell you, it was about time. She had him fooled for so long, weaving her web of lies and making him believe she was this elegant, caring woman. But now, the illusion was gone. Dad was no longer her toy, no longer under her control. It was like he finally saw her for what she truly was, a manipulator, a fraud, someone who had been using him all along. And the best part? He wasn't even angry anymore. He was just done with her. There was no love left, no second chances, just cold, hard realization. And that, more than anything, was what really finished her. As for me, oh, I was more than satisfied. There's a special kind of relief that comes when you finally close a chapter in your life that's been dragging on for way too long. That's exactly how I felt. Like I'd finally put a period at the end of a sentence that had gone on forever. Linda destroyed my past. She wiped out my connection to my mom, erased every trace of her memory, and tried to bury everything that mattered to me. But in return, I destroyed Linda's present. I tore down everything she had built, every fake thing she'd surrounded herself with, and left her standing in the ruins of her own lies. There was no coming back for her. Her little empire of deception? Gone. Her high-status life? Down the drain, never to be rebuilt. She thought she could erase my mom, wipe her memory from existence, but I made sure she couldn't touch what was left of her own life. And now, I still had my mom's memory. That was one part of my life Linda could never touch again. And that feeling of justice finally being served. Oh, it was like winning a game where the stakes were everything. There's nothing sweeter than knowing the person who tried to destroy you is the one left picking up the pieces of their own shattered world.